The blood-curdling scream echoed through the small wooden cabin as Abigail Dawson clutched the lifeless infant in her trembling hands, knowing in that terrible moment that all her skills as a midwife had failed to save Mayor Fletcher's firstborn son. Agua Caliente, Arizona Territory. 1878. The night air was thick with the metallic scent of blood and the heavy weight of tragedy. Abigail's throat constricted as she looked up from the tiny blue-tinged body to meet the wild-eyed gaze of Rebecca Fletcher, who was propped against sweat-soaked pillows, her face contorted in exhaustion and confusion. "My baby," Rebecca whispered, her voice cracking. "Why isn't he crying? Abigail, why isn't my baby crying?" Abigail swallowed hard, her hands still cradling the infant who had fought so bravely but lost his battle before taking his first breath. The umbilical cord had been wrapped around his neck, hidden from her examination until it was too late. She had delivered dozens of babies in Agua Caliente over the past 3 years, but never had she faced such a devastating outcome with such a prominent family. "I'm so sorry, Rebecca," Abigail managed, her voice barely audible. "The cord. There was nothing I could do." Rebecca's confusion transformed into horrified understanding. Then a wail of anguish ripped from her throat, a primal sound of loss that seemed to shake the very foundations of the cabin. William Fletcher burst through the bedroom door at the sound of his wife's cry, his face pale with worry. "What's happened? Is it?" His words died as he saw the motionless bundle in Abigail's arms. The mayor's face hardened as he looked from his stillborn son to Abigail, his grief morphing into something darker. "You did this?" he whispered, his voice deadly quiet. "You killed my boy." "No, William, please," Abigail began, but the words caught in her throat as Fletcher snatched his son's body from her arms. "Get out," he snarled. "Get out." Abigail stumbled backward, gathering her bloodied apron around her. "Rebecca needs care. She's still bleeding." "I said get out." Fletcher's voice rose to a roar. "Martha can tend to my wife. You've done enough damage." With shaking hands, Abigail collected her medical bag, stealing one last glance at Rebecca, who was curled into herself, sobbing uncontrollably. "I'm so sorry," Abigail whispered again, though she knew her words were lost in the storm of grief that filled the room. The cool night air hit her tear-streaked face as she stepped onto the porch of the Fletcher home, the most imposing residence in Agua Caliente. She hadn't gone 3 steps before Fletcher's voice boomed behind her. "You'll pay for this, Abigail Dawson. You hear me? The whole town will know what you've done." The threat followed her down the dirt road as she made her way back to her small cottage at the edge of town, the weight of the night's tragedy pressing down on her shoulders. She had lost babies before. It was an unfortunate reality of frontier life, but never had she been blamed. Never had she seen such hatred in a parent's eyes. By dawn, Mayor Fletcher had made good on his promise. Abigail awoke to the sound of angry voices outside her cottage. Through the thin curtains, she could see a gathering crowd, their faces grim in the early morning light. "Murderer! Witch! You killed the mayor's son." The accusations flew like arrows, each one finding its mark in Abigail's heart. She sank to the floor beneath her window, drawing her knees to her chest as tears streamed down her face. She knew the truth that sometimes, despite every precaution and all the knowledge she possessed, babies didn't survive. But in the face of the town's grief and anger, that truth seemed to matter little. A rock shattered her front window, sending glass shards cascading around her. Abigail screamed, covering her head with her arms as more rocks followed, along with threats that chilled her to the bone. "Come out and face what you've done. String her up. Justice for the Fletcher boy." Panic seized her as the door to her cottage began to shake under the force of angry fists. They were going to break in, drag her out, and she couldn't even bring herself to imagine what would happen next. Just as the door began to splinter, the sound of a rifle shot cracked through the air, silencing the mob. Abigail peered through the broken window to see a tall figure on horseback, rifle raised to the sky. "That's enough." The voice that rang out was deep and commanding, cutting through the angry murmurs of the crowd. "Step back from the lady's door, all of you." Through her tears, Abigail recognized Yates Keller, a rancher whose property lay a few miles outside of town. She had delivered his foreman's baby just last spring, a healthy girl with a lusty cry, but had rarely exchanged more than polite greetings with the man himself. "This ain't your concern, Keller," someone shouted from the crowd. "That woman killed the mayor's son last night." "A baby died," Yates corrected, his voice steady as he guided his horse through the parting crowd. "And that's a tragedy, no doubt. But Miss Dawson didn't kill anyone. And I won't stand by while you threaten an innocent woman." "Innocent?" Fletcher's voice rose above the others as he pushed his way to the front of the crowd, his face haggard with grief and rage. "My son is dead because of her incompetence." Yates dismounted in one fluid motion, his spurs jangling as his boots hit the dirt. Despite the gravity of the situation, Abigail couldn't help but notice how he moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to facing down danger. His dark hair fell in waves beneath his wide-brimmed hat, and his jaw was set in determination. "I'm sorry for your loss, Fletcher," he said, his tone softening slightly. "Truly I am. But this isn't justice, it's a lynch mob. And I won't allow it." Fletcher's face reddened. "You have no authority here, Keller. This is town business." "Then let the law handle it," Yates replied, nodding toward the sheriff, who stood uncomfortably at the edge of the crowd. "If you have a grievance against Miss Dawson, take it to court. But this," he gestured to the broken windows and the splintered door, "this stops now." The tension in the air was palpable as the two men faced off, neither willing to back down. Abigail held her breath, wondering if she had merely exchanged one danger for another. Would the crowd turn on Yates as well? Would there be bloodshed on her account? Finally, Fletcher spoke, his voice low and menacing. "This isn't over, Keller. Not by a long shot." He turned to address the crowd. "The funeral's at sundown. I expect all of you to be there to pay your respects." With a final glare at Abigail's cottage, he stalked away, several of the townspeople following in his wake. Others lingered, their hostility still evident, but the presence of Yates and his rifle kept them at bay. Eventually, they too drifted away, leaving only Yates standing guard outside Abigail's damaged door. Cautiously, she unlatched what remained of it, peering out at her unexpected protector. Up close, she could see the weariness in his eyes and the stubble on his jaw, as if he had ridden through the night. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. Yates nodded, his expression grim. "Are you hurt?" "No, just scared." Abigail glanced at her shattered windows and splintered door. "But I can't stay here. They'll come back once you're gone." "I know." Yates removed his hat, running a hand through his hair. "Pack whatever you need. You're coming with me to the ranch. It's not safe for you in town right now." Abigail blinked, taken aback by the offer. "I can't impose. It's not an imposition, it's a necessity." He cut her off, his tone brooking no argument. "Fletcher's grief has turned to vengeance, and he won't rest until he's run you out of town or worse. My ranch is far enough away to give things time to cool down." Looking at the destruction around her, Abigail knew he was right. The townspeople she had called neighbors and friends for years had turned on her in an instant. Where else could she go? "I'll need to gather my medical supplies," she said finally. "And some clothes." Yates nodded, placing his hat back on his head. "Take only what you need. We should be gone before anyone decides to come back." As Abigail hurried to collect her belongings, she felt a strange mixture of fear and relief. fear of what the future held, of the hatred that had been unleashed against her, but relief that at least for now, she wasn't facing it alone. Within 20 minutes, she had packed 2 small bags, one with clothing and personal items, the other with her most essential medical supplies. She couldn't bear to leave behind the tools of her trade, even if she never practiced midwifery again. Yates had been keeping watch outside, but he turned as she emerged with her bags. Ready. Abigail took one last look at the cottage that had been her home, at the garden she had tended with such care, at the life she had built. Then she nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. Yes, I'm ready. Yates secured her bags to his saddle, then helped her mount his horse before swinging up behind her. The closeness was improper, but propriety seemed a distant concern when faced with the threat of a mob. As they rode away from Agua Caliente, Abigail could feel the warmth of Yates's chest against her back, his arms on either side of her as he held the reins. She had never been this close to a man before, and despite the circumstances, she couldn't help but notice the steady beat of his heart and the comforting strength of his presence. Thank you, she said again, her voice barely audible over the sound of hoofbeats. I don't know why you helped me, but I'm grateful. Yates was quiet for a moment before responding. 3 years ago, my wife died in childbirth. The midwife did everything she could, but sometimes there's nothing to be done. I couldn't save Marie, but I could save you. The simple, painful honesty of his words brought fresh tears to Abigail's eyes. She didn't know what to say, so she remained silent, letting the rhythmic motion of the horse carry them away from danger and toward an uncertain future. The Keller Ranch sprawled across several hundred acres of mixed grassland and rocky terrain, with the main house and outbuildings nestled in a sheltered valley beside a small, year-round creek. It was larger and more prosperous than Abigail had imagined, with well-maintained corrals, a substantial barn, and a 2-story house built of sturdy timber and local stone. As they approached, several ranch hands looked up from their work, curious about the unexpected visitor. A tall, lean man with graying hair at his temples stepped forward as Yates reined in his horse. Everything all right, boss? He asked, his gaze shifting to Abigail with undisguised curiosity. Not exactly, Tom, Yates replied, dismounting before helping Abigail down. This is Miss Abigail Dawson. She'll be staying with us for a while. There was trouble in town. Tom's eyes widened slightly in recognition. The midwife? My Sarah still talks about how you saved her and little Emily last spring. Abigail managed a small smile, touched by the mention of one of her successful deliveries. How is your daughter? Growing like a weed and twice as stubborn, Tom replied with a proud grin. But what trouble? What happened? Yates placed a gentle hand on Abigail's shoulder. Mayor Fletcher's son was stillborn last night. The town's looking for someone to blame. Understanding dawned on Tom's weathered face. And they blamed you? That's not right. No, it's not, Yates agreed. But grief does strange things to people. Miss Dawson needs a safe place to stay until things settle down. Tom nodded, his expression serious. You can count on us, boss. No one'll bother her here. The ranch foreman's ready acceptance lightened Abigail's heart a little as Yates led her toward the main house. It was a modest but comfortable dwelling, with a spacious kitchen, a cozy sitting room, and several bedrooms upstairs. Everything was neat and functional, though Abigail noticed the absence of feminine touches, no embroidered pillows or decorative curtains, just the basics needed for comfortable living. It's not fancy, Yates said, seeming to read her thoughts as he set her bags down in the sitting room. But it's safe. It's more than I could have hoped for, Abigail replied sincerely. I don't know how I'll ever repay your kindness. Yates shook his head. There's nothing to repay. I'll have Maria prepare a room for you. She's our cook and housekeeper. She comes in from her place in the mornings and leaves after supper, but she's trustworthy. He showed her to a small washroom where she could freshen up, then left her to collect herself while he spoke with Maria, a plump, motherly Mexican woman who clucked sympathetically when she heard Abigail's situation. By late afternoon, Abigail was settled in a comfortable bedroom on the second floor, her few belongings unpacked. The window overlooked the creek and the rolling hills beyond, a view so peaceful it seemed impossible that just hours ago, she had been facing an angry mob. A gentle knock at the door roused her from her thoughts. She opened it to find Yates standing there, his hat in his hands, looking somewhat awkward. "I hope the room is comfortable," he said. "Very, thank you." Abigail hesitated, then asked the question that had been weighing on her mind. "How long do you think I'll need to stay away from town?" Yates's expression grew serious. "I can't say for certain. Fletcher has a lot of influence, and grief can make a person hold on to anger for a long time. But you should be safe here as long as you need to be." "And what about your reputation?" Abigail asked softly. "Having an unmarried woman living in your home. My reputation can weather a few whispers," Yates replied with a slight smile. "Besides, Maria will be here during the days, and everyone on the ranch knows you're here because you need protection, not because of any impropriety." His consideration touched her deeply. "Still, I can't stay indefinitely. I need to make a plan. Perhaps move to another town where I can start over." "There's time for planning," Yates assured her. "For now, just rest. Maria's made supper nothing fancy, but it's hot and there's plenty of it." Abigail followed him downstairs to the kitchen, where a simple but hearty meal of beef stew, fresh bread, and apple pie awaited them. Maria had already left for the evening, but she had set the table for two in the dining room. As they ate, Yates gradually drew Abigail out, asking about her background and how she had come to Agua Caliente. She told him about her apprenticeship with an experienced midwife in St. Louis, her decision to move west after her parents' deaths, and the 3 years she had spent building a practice in the small Arizona town. "I thought I had become part of the community," she said, pushing her half-eaten stew around her bowl. "I delivered most of the babies born there in the past 3 years. I knew those people cared for them, and they turned on me so quickly. Fear and grief can bring out the worst in people," Yates said quietly. "But don't judge them too harshly. Many of them will regret their actions once the initial shock passes." "But will they regret them enough to let me come back?" Abigail asked, knowing the answer before she even asked the question. Yates's silence was answer enough. They finished their meal in contemplative quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. Afterward, Abigail insisted on helping with the dishes despite Yates's protests. "I won't be a burden," she said firmly. "If I'm to stay here, I'll earn my keep." Yates looked as if he wanted to argue, but seemed to recognize the stubborn set of her jaw and merely nodded. They worked side by side in comfortable silence, Abigail washing and Yates drying. When they finished, Yates poured 2 small glasses of whiskey and led Abigail to the sitting room, where a fire crackled pleasantly in the hearth despite the mild evening. "I don't usually indulge," Abigail said hesitantly as he offered her a glass. "Consider it medicinal," Yates replied with a small smile. "For the nerves." She accepted the glass, taking a tentative sip. The liquor burned a path down her throat, but not unpleasantly, and she had to admit that the warmth spreading through her was soothing after the day's events. They sat in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the occasional coyote call in the distance. Finally, Abigail spoke, giving voice to the question that had been nagging at her. "Your wife. You said she died in childbirth. What about the baby?" Pain flashed across Yates's face, but he answered steadily. "My son lived. He's with my sister in Denver. After Marie died, I wasn't in any state to care for an infant. I visit when I can, but—" He trailed off, taking a deeper swallow of his whiskey. "I'm sorry," Abigail said softly. "I shouldn't have asked." "No, it's all right," Yates assured her. "It was 8 years ago. The pain never goes away completely, but it dulls with time." "What's your son's name?" "James. He's a good boy, smart, like his mother." A fond smile softened Yates's features. "He wants to be a doctor someday." "That's a noble ambition," Abigail said, touched by the evident pride in Yates's voice. "Do you think you'll ever bring him to live with you?" Yates stared into the fire, considering the question. "I've thought about it, especially as he gets older. But a ranch is no place for a boy without a mother, and I'm away too often to give him the attention he deserves." "I don't know," Abigail mused, warming to the subject. "I think a ranch would be a wonderful place for a boy to grow up. Fresh air, horses, plenty of space to run and explore. And he would have his father." "Perhaps," Yates conceded, looking thoughtful. "My sister has mentioned that he asks about me about the ranch more frequently these days." They talked late into the evening, the conversation flowing easily as they shared stories and opinions. Abigail found herself relaxing in Yates's company, temporarily forgetting the traumatic events that had brought her to his home. There was something about his quiet strength and thoughtful manner that put her at ease, making her feel safe for the first time since the tragedy at the Fletcher home. When Abigail finally retired to her room, exhaustion overtook her the moment her head touched the pillow. Despite the horrors of the day, she fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. The next morning, Abigail awoke to the sounds and smells of a working ranch horse's neighing, men calling to each other, and the enticing aroma of coffee and bacon wafting up from the kitchen. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was or why she was there. Then the memories came flooding back: the stillborn baby, the angry mob, Yates Keller coming to her rescue. She dressed quickly in one of the simple cotton dresses she had brought with her, braided her long auburn hair, and made her way downstairs. Maria was bustling around the kitchen, humming to herself as she prepared breakfast. "Ah, buenos dias, señorita." The housekeeper greeted her warmly. "Did you sleep well? You must be hungry after yesterday's troubles. Sit, sit. I will bring you coffee." Before Abigail could protest, Maria had ushered her into a chair at the kitchen table and placed a steaming cup of coffee before her, followed by a plate laden with eggs, bacon, and fresh biscuits. "Thank you, Maria," Abigail said sincerely. "This looks wonderful." "Eat, eat," Maria encouraged. "Senor Yates, he is already out with the men. They are moving cattle to the north pasture today. He said to tell you to make yourself at home." Abigail ate gratefully, realizing how little she had consumed the day before. As she finished her breakfast, she asked Maria if there was anything she could do to help around the house. "No, no," Maria protested. "You are a guest. Senor Yates would not want you to work." "Please," Abigail insisted. "I need to keep busy. My thoughts are difficult right now." Understanding softened Maria's round face. "I see. Sometimes the hands need work to quiet the mind." "Very well, you can help me with the bread for tonight. And perhaps the mending? Senor Yates has shirts that need attention." Grateful for the distraction, Abigail spent the morning learning Maria's bread recipe and carefully mending the tears and missing buttons on Yates's work shirts. The simple, repetitive tasks were soothing, allowing her mind to settle after the turmoil of the previous day. In the early afternoon, while Maria was preparing a stew for dinner, a commotion outside drew their attention. Abigail went to the window to see Tom, the foreman, riding in hard, his horse lathered with sweat. "Trouble," Maria murmured, her expression worried. Abigail watched as Tom dismounted and spoke urgently to one of the ranch hands, who immediately ran toward the north pasture, presumably to fetch Yates. Her stomach knotted with anxiety. Had Fletcher and his followers come looking for her? Her fears were confirmed when, a short time later, Yates rode into the yard, his expression grim as Tom briefed him. Abigail couldn't hear their conversation, but she could see the tension in Yates's shoulders as he nodded and gave what appeared to be instructions to several of the ranch hands. When Yates strode toward the house, Abigail met him at the door, her heart pounding. "What's happened?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Fletcher and a few men from town are on their way," Yates replied, his voice tight with controlled anger. "They're about an hour out, according to one of our hands who spotted them on the road." "I should leave," Abigail said immediately. "I don't want to bring trouble to you and your men." Yates's hand on her arm stopped her. "No, you're staying right here. This is my property, and Fletcher has no right to come making demands. But what if they try to force their way in? What if someone gets hurt because of me? That would be Fletcher's doing, not yours," Yates said firmly. "I've sent for Sheriff Davis. He was already on his way out here on other business, but he should arrive before Fletcher does." Abigail blinked in surprise. "The sheriff is coming here? Why?" Yates's expression softened slightly. "To take your statement about what happened with the Fletcher baby. He may not look it, but Davis is a fair man. He wants to hear your side of the story before making any judgments." A spark of hope kindled in Abigail's chest. Perhaps there was a chance for justice after all, a chance to clear her name. "In the meantime," Yates continued, "I want you to stay inside. I've positioned men around the house, and no one's getting in without my say-so." Abigail nodded, grateful for his protection but still uneasy about putting others at risk. "Thank you, Yates. I don't know what I would have done without your help." Something flickered in his eyes, a warmth that went beyond mere kindness, but it was gone so quickly that Abigail wondered if she had imagined it. "Try not to worry," he said, his voice gentler than before. "I won't let anything happen to you." With that promise, he left to make further preparations, leaving Abigail to wait anxiously with Maria, who muttered prayers in Spanish under her breath as she aggressively kneaded dough for another batch of bread. Sheriff Davis arrived half an hour later, a stocky man with a graying mustache and shrewd eyes beneath the brim of his dusty hat. Yates brought him into the sitting room where Abigail waited, her hands clasped tightly in her lap to hide their trembling. "Miss Dawson," the sheriff greeted her, removing his hat. "I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances." "Sheriff," Abigail acknowledged with a nod. "Thank you for coming." Davis settled into a chair across from her, while Yates remained standing, his presence a comforting bulwark between Abigail and the troubles closing in from outside. "I need to ask you some questions about what happened with the Fletcher baby," Davis said, his tone neutral. "I understand it was a difficult situation, but I need to hear the facts." Abigail took a deep breath and recounted the events of that terrible night, the long labor, the complications she had observed, and the tragic discovery of the umbilical cord wrapped around the infant's neck. She spoke calmly and professionally, though tears threatened as she described her efforts to revive the baby. "And you're certain there was nothing else that could have been done?" Davis asked when she had finished. "No warning signs earlier in the pregnancy?" "None," Abigail confirmed. "I saw Rebecca regularly throughout her pregnancy, and everything appeared normal, the cord being wrapped around the neck. It's not uncommon, and usually we can address it during delivery. But in this case, it was too tight, and the baby was already in distress when I discovered the issue." Davis nodded, making notes in a small book he had pulled from his pocket. "And Mayor Fletcher's accusation that you were negligent, is there any basis for that?" "No, sir," Abigail replied firmly. "I followed all the proper procedures. I've delivered dozens of babies, including several with cord complications. Sometimes, despite our best efforts, tragedy strikes. The sheriff studied her face for a long moment, as if gauging her sincerity. Finally, he closed his notebook. "I believe you, Miss Dawson. What happened was a tragedy, not a crime. But Fletcher is grieving, and grief can make a man irrational." "He's not just grieving, Sheriff," Yates interjected. "He's whipping up a mob that goes beyond grief into dangerous territory." Davis sighed heavily. "I know. That's why I'm here. I got word about what happened in town yesterday, and I don't intend to let it happen again." The sound of approaching horses interrupted their conversation. Yates moved to the window, his expression hardening as he looked out. "They're here," he said simply. 6 men, Fletcher in the lead. Davis stood, straightening his vest and checking that his revolver was secure in its holster. "Let me handle this, Keller. That's what the badge is for." Yates nodded reluctantly. "My men have instructions not to start anything, but they won't stand by if Fletcher's bunch turns violent." "It won't come to that," Davis said, though he didn't sound entirely convinced. "Miss Dawson, it might be best if you stay inside." Abigail rose, her chin lifted defiantly. "No, Sheriff. I won't hide. If Mayor Fletcher has accusations to make, let him make them to my face." Yates looked as if he wanted to protest, but the admiration in his eyes was unmistakable. "All right," he said finally, "but you stay behind us." The 3 of them stepped onto the front porch just as Fletcher and his men reined in their horses in the yard. The mayor's face was haggard, with dark circles under his eyes speaking of sleepless nights, but his expression hardened when he saw Abigail. "There she is," he said, his voice carrying across the yard. "The woman who killed my son." "That's enough, Fletcher," Sheriff Davis called out, stepping forward. "You're trespassing on private property." Fletcher's laugh was bitter. "Trespassing? That's rich. We're here for justice, Davis. That woman is responsible for my boy's death, and she needs to answer for it. The law will determine if anyone needs to answer for anything," Davis replied evenly. "And last I checked, the law in this territory doesn't include lynch mobs." "What law?" Fletcher sneered. You're one man with a tin star. We are the law out here, and we say she's guilty." Murmurs of agreement came from the men behind him, though Abigail noticed that a couple of them looked uncomfortable with the mayor's rhetoric. Yates moved to stand beside the sheriff, his hand resting casually near his holstered revolver. "You need to leave, Fletcher. Miss Dawson is under my protection, and neither she nor I have any quarrel with you." "Protection?" Fletcher spat. "You're harboring a murderer, Keller. Does that make you an accessory? Or is there another reason you're so eager to have the widowmaker in your house?" Yates's jaw tightened at the insinuation, but he kept his voice level. "I'm protecting an innocent woman from a grieving father who can't see straight through his pain. I'm sorry about your son, Fletcher. Truly. But blaming Miss Dawson won't bring him back." For a moment, genuine anguish broke through Fletcher's anger, and Abigail saw the depth of his suffering. Despite everything, her heart ached for him and for Rebecca, whose grief must be immeasurable. "My wife hasn't stopped crying," Fletcher said, his voice suddenly hollow. "She keeps asking for her baby. What am I supposed to tell her?" Before anyone could respond, one of the ranch hands came running from the direction of the bunkhouse. "Rider coming in fast from town," he called. "Looks like Doc Harris." All heads turned to see an elderly man on a lathered horse galloping toward them, his medical bag bouncing against his side. Dr. Harris was Agua Caliente's only physician, a respected figure who had served the community for over 20 years. He pulled his horse to a stop, breathing hard as he dismounted. "Fletcher," he gasped. "Thank God I found you. It's Rebecca, she's hemorrhaging. Martha sent for me, but she's in a bad way. You need to come now." The color drained from Fletcher's face. Rebecca? But you said she was recovering. She was, Dr. Harris replied grimly. But sometimes these complications arise days after the birth. I've done what I can. But, he hesitated, then turned to Abigail. Miss Dawson, I need your help. You have more experience with postpartum complications than I do. A hush fell over the gathering as all eyes turned to Abigail. She stood frozen for a moment, stunned by the request and the sudden shift in circumstances. You want her help? Fletcher exploded. After what she did to my son? Your wife could die, William, Dr. Harris said bluntly. Miss Dawson is the best chance Rebecca has right now. Would you let your pride cost you your wife as well as your son? Fletcher's face contorted with conflicting emotions: grief, anger, fear. Finally, he looked at Abigail, desperation replacing the hatred in his eyes. Can you help her? He asked, his voice breaking. Abigail straightened her shoulders, her professional instincts taking over. I'll do everything I can, Mayor Fletcher. But we need to hurry. Take my horse, Yates said immediately, signaling to one of his men. He's faster than anything Fletcher's men are riding. As the ranch hand brought Yates's stallion forward, Abigail quickly gathered her medical bag from inside the house. When she returned to the porch, Yates was waiting to help her mount. I'm coming with you, he said in a low voice that brooked no argument. There's no need, Abigail began. There is every need. Yates cut her off. I don't trust Fletcher or the mood in town. I'm not letting you go alone. The determined set of his jaw told Abigail that further argument would be futile. With a nod of acceptance, she allowed him to help her onto the horse before swinging up behind her. Fletcher and Dr. Harris were already mounted, waiting impatiently. The sheriff moved his horse alongside Yates's. I'll come too, Davis said, just to make sure everything stays civil. The group set off at a gallop, the urgency of Rebecca's condition temporarily overriding the conflict that had brought them together. As they rode, Abigail leaned slightly against Yates's solid presence behind her, drawing strength from his steadfastness. Are you sure about this? He asked quietly, his breath warm against her ear. After everything they've done? I'm sure, Abigail replied without hesitation. I became a midwife to help women and their babies. I won't turn my back on Rebecca because of Fletcher's actions. Yates's arm tightened briefly around her waist. You're a remarkable woman, Abigail Dawson. The simple compliment warmed her more than it should have, given the gravity of their mission, but Abigail found herself grateful for it nonetheless. Whatever awaited them in Agua Caliente, she would face it with courage, and she would not face it alone. They reached the Fletcher home in record time, the horses lathered and blowing hard from the punishing pace. Abigail dismounted quickly, not waiting for assistance, and hurried into the house with her medical bag clutched tightly in her hand. Dr. Harris followed close behind, with Fletcher, Yates, and Sheriff Davis trailing after them. The bedroom where the tragedy had unfolded 2 nights before was now the scene of another desperate battle. Rebecca lay pale and still among blood-soaked sheets, her breathing shallow and rapid. Martha, the housekeeper who had taken over Abigail's duties, looked up with relief when they entered. "Thank God you're here," she said to Dr. Harris, then stopped short when she saw Abigail. "Miss Dawson? But I thought, there's no time for explanations." Abigail cut her off, moving swiftly to Rebecca's side. She took the unconscious woman's wrist, counting the rapid, thready pulse with practiced precision. "How much blood has she lost?" "Too much," Martha replied, gesturing to a basin filled with crimson-stained cloths. "It started as just a trickle this morning, but it's been getting worse all day." Abigail pulled back the covers to examine Rebecca, noting the continued bleeding and the firmness of her lower abdomen. "Retained placental fragments," she diagnosed. looking at Dr. Harris for confirmation. "We need to remove them immediately, or she'll bleed out." The doctor nodded grimly. "I suspected as much but hoped it wasn't the case. It's a risky procedure." "We have no choice," Abigail said, already rolling up her sleeves. "Martha, I need clean hot water, as many clean linens as you can find, and a bottle of whiskey both for sterilizing and for the patient, if she regains consciousness." As Martha hurried to fulfill the requests, Abigail turned to the men who stood uncertainly in the doorway. "You should wait outside," she told them. "This is not something you need to witness." Fletcher looked as if he might protest, but Dr. Harris placed a firm hand on his arm. "She's right, William. Let the professionals do their work." Reluctantly, Fletcher allowed himself to be led from the room. Yates lingered for a moment, his eyes meeting Abigail's. "Be careful," he said quietly, before following the others out. For the next 2 hours, Abigail and Dr. Harris worked together to save Rebecca's life. The procedure was delicate and dangerous, requiring a steady hand and intimate knowledge of a woman's body. Abigail's expertise as a midwife complemented the doctor's medical training, and together they managed to remove the retained tissue that was causing the hemorrhage. Throughout the ordeal, Rebecca drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes crying out for her baby in heart-wrenching sobs that tore at Abigail's heart. Each time, Abigail spoke soothingly to her, stroking her forehead and offering what comfort she could, while continuing the life-saving work. Finally, the bleeding slowed and then stopped. Abigail helped Martha change the bedding and bathe Rebecca while Dr. Harris prepared a tonic to help prevent infection and restore strength. "She'll need close monitoring for the next few days," Abigail told Martha as they finished making Rebecca comfortable. "Watch for fever or renewed bleeding. If either occurs, send for Dr. Harris immediately." Martha nodded, her earlier hostility replaced with grudging respect. "I will. And thank you, Miss Dawson. I was wrong about you." Exhausted and blood-stained, Abigail made her way downstairs to where the men waited in tense silence. All heads turned as she entered the parlor, but it was Fletcher who spoke first, leaping to his feet. "Rebecca? Is she? She's alive," Abigail assured him, her voice weary but steady. "And with proper care she should recover. But she'll need time to heal, both in body and spirit." The relief that washed over Fletcher's face was profound. For a moment he seemed at a loss for words. Then, unexpectedly, he stepped forward and took Abigail's hand in both of his. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I was wrong about you. My grief, it blinded me, made me look for someone to blame. I am so sorry for what I did, for what I almost allowed to happen." The sincere apology took Abigail by surprise. She had expected continued hostility, perhaps even a grudging acknowledgement of her skills, but not this complete reversal. "Your wife needs you now, Mayor Fletcher," she said gently. "Focus on helping her through this difficult time." Fletcher nodded, tears glistening in his eyes. "I will, and I give you my word when I return to town, I'll make sure everyone knows the truth about what happened. Your reputation will be restored, Miss Dawson." Dr. Harris, who had joined them in time to hear Fletcher's promise, added his own assurance. "I'll see to it as well. What happened with your son was a tragedy, but not one of Miss Dawson's making. It's time the town knew that." The weight that had pressed on Abigail's shoulders since the night of the stillbirth began to lift. She looked across the room to where Yates stood watching her, his expression a mixture of pride and something deeper, more personal. "Thank you, gentlemen," she said, addressing Fletcher and Dr. Harris but unable to tear her gaze from Yates. "That means more to me than you know." In the days that followed, true to his word, Mayor Fletcher made public amends for his accusations against Abigail. He addressed the town at a specially called meeting, explaining how grief had clouded his judgment and acknowledging that his son's death had been a tragic act of nature, not the result of negligence. Dr. Harris supported his statement with medical facts, lending his considerable authority to Abigail's vindication. Most of the townspeople accepted the truth readily, many of them ashamed of their participation in the mob that had threatened her. A few remained skeptical, but they kept their opinions to themselves in the face of the mayor's turnaround. Despite these positive developments, Abigail found herself reluctant to return to her damaged cottage in town. She had accepted Yates's invitation to remain at the ranch until her home could be properly repaired, an arrangement that raised a few eyebrows but was generally accepted given the circumstances. In truth, her reluctance had less to do with the state of her cottage and more to do with the growing attachment she felt to Yates Keller. During the week following Rebecca's crisis, they had fallen into a comfortable routine at the ranch. Abigail helped Maria with household tasks during the day and spent evenings in conversation with Yates, learning about his life, his hopes for the ranch, and his thoughts on everything from politics to literature. She discovered that beneath his rugged exterior lay a thoughtful, educated man who had attended college in the East before heading west to make his fortune. He had inherited the ranch from an uncle, turning what had been a modest operation into one of the most successful in the territory through hard work and smart management. More significantly, she found herself sharing parts of herself she had never revealed to anyone: her childhood dreams, her fears about the future, her loneliness as a single woman in a frontier town. Yates listened with genuine interest, never judging, often offering insights that helped her see her own life in a new light. "Have you ever thought about leaving Agua Caliente?" he asked one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Even before all this happened, Abigail considered the question, absently running her finger along the rim of her coffee cup. "Sometimes," she admitted, "it's not easy being a single woman in a town this size. There's always talk, always scrutiny. But my work was fulfilling, and I felt needed." "And now?" Yates prompted gently. She sighed, watching a hawk circle lazily above the distant hills. "Now I'm not sure. The cottage can be repaired, and Fletcher has made amends, but can I ever really go back to the way things were? Will women trust me with their most vulnerable moments after what happened?" "Some might not," Yates acknowledged. "But others will remember all the babies you delivered safely, all the mothers you helped through difficult times. Your reputation was earned through years of good work. It can't be destroyed by one tragic night." His faith in her warmed Abigail's heart. "Perhaps you're right, but part of me wonders if this might be a sign that it's time for a change." Yates was silent for a long moment, his expression thoughtful as he gazed out at the deepening twilight. Finally, he turned to face her, his eyes reflecting the last golden rays of the setting sun. "What if you didn't have to leave?" he asked, his voice low and earnest. "What if there was a place for you here?" Abigail's breath caught in her throat at the implication behind his words. "Here? At the ranch?" "Yes." Yates set his coffee cup aside and leaned forward, his gaze intensely focused on her face. "Abigail, I know we've only known each other a short time, but these past days, getting to know you, talking with you each evening, seeing your strength and compassion, it's awakened feelings in me I thought had died with Marie." Her heart began to race, hope and uncertainty warring within her. "Yates, you don't have to answer now," he said quickly. "I know it's sudden, but I want you to know that I care for you deeply. And not just because you needed protection or because I admire your skills as a midwife. I care for you as a woman, as Abigail." The sincerity in his voice brought tears to her eyes. She had grown to care for him too, his quiet strength, his unwavering moral compass, the gentle way he listened when she spoke as if every word mattered. But was it too soon? Could something lasting grow from such tumultuous beginnings? "I care for you too," she admitted softly. But I don't want your pity, or your protection, to be mistaken for something else. Yates reached out, taking her hand in his. The calluses on his palm spoke of years of hard work, but his touch was gentle as his fingers intertwined with hers. This isn't pity, Abigail, he assured her. And while I'll always want to protect those I care about, that's not why I'm sitting here with my heart pounding like a schoolboy's, wondering if you might consider a future with a widowed rancher who hasn't properly courted a woman in a decade. A smile curved Abigail's lips at his candid admission. Is that what you're doing? Courting me? Rather poorly, it seems, Yates replied with a self-deprecating chuckle. But yes, if you're amenable to the idea. Abigail looked down at their joined hands, then back up to meet his hopeful gaze. I think I would like that very much, she said softly. The smile that spread across Yates's face was like the sunrise breaking over the eastern hills, warm, radiant, full of promise. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. Then may I call on you properly, Miss Dawson? Perhaps escort you to dinner in town when you're ready to face agua caliente again. You may, Mr. Keller, Abigail replied, her heart light with newfound joy. Though I must warn you, we're likely to be the subject of considerable gossip. Let them gossip, Yates said with a dismissive wave of his free hand. I've never much cared what people think, and recent events have shown that public opinion is a fickle thing anyway. Abigail couldn't argue with that assessment. The same townspeople who had been ready to drag her from her home now nodded politely when they saw her in town, their previous hostility seemingly forgotten in the wake of Fletcher's public apology and her successful treatment of Rebecca. In the weeks that followed, Yates courted Abigail with a blend of old-fashioned gallantry and practical frontier sensibility. He escorted her to town for supplies, proudly walking beside her down the main street of Agua Caliente. He invited her to Sunday dinners with some of the neighboring ranching families, introducing her as the lady who has captured my interest. Word of their courtship spread quickly, generating the expected whispers and speculation, but also a surprising amount of support, particularly from those who had known Yates the longest. His foreman, Tom, confided to Abigail that he hadn't seen the boss so happy in years, while Maria beamed approvingly whenever she caught them in quiet conversation. Abigail's cottage in town was repaired, the broken windows replaced and the door reinforced, but she found herself spending less and less time there. Her midwifery practice slowly revived as well, with a few of her former patients cautiously seeking her services again. The most meaningful reconciliation came from Rebecca Fletcher herself, who invited Abigail to tea one afternoon and thanked her tearfully for saving her life. William told me everything, Rebecca said, her hands trembling slightly as she poured the tea. How he led the town against you, how they threatened you, and how you came back to help me despite it all. I can never repay such generosity of spirit. There's nothing to repay, Abigail assured her, touched by the woman's sincerity. I only did what any midwife would do. Rebecca shook her head. Not any midwife, not after being treated so abominably. She hesitated, then added softly, I want you to know that I never blamed you for our son's death. In my heart, I knew you had done everything possible to save him. Those words, more than Fletcher's public apology or the town's renewed acceptance, helped heal the deepest wound in Abigail's heart. She left the Fletcher home with lighter steps, feeling truly vindicated at last. That evening, she shared the conversation with Yates as they walked along the creek that ran through his property, the setting sun casting long shadows across the rippling water. Rebecca's forgiveness means the world to me, Abigail concluded. I think now I can truly put the whole terrible episode behind me. Yates nodded, understanding in his eyes. And decide on your future? He asked, his tone carefully neutral despite the weight of the question. Abigail stopped walking, turning to face him fully. In the golden light of sunset, his features were cast in strong relief, the straight line of his nose, the firm set of his jaw, the warmth in his eyes as he gazed down at her. "I've been thinking about that," she said. "I believe I can continue my practice here, riding out to attend births at neighboring ranches and in town when needed. It wouldn't be quite the same as before, but perhaps even better in some ways." Hope lit Yates's face. "You're staying, then? In Agua Caliente?" Abigail smiled, reaching up to touch his cheek gently. "I'm staying, if there's still a place for me." Yates caught her hand, pressing it more firmly against his face before turning to kiss her palm. "There will always be a place for you, Abigail. Here with me, if that's what you want." The tenderness in his voice made her heart swell. "It is," she whispered. "Very much." With exquisite gentleness, Yates drew her into his arms. "May I kiss you, Abigail Dawson?" he asked, his voice husky with emotion. "Please," she replied, raising her face to his. Their first kiss was soft and sweet, a promise exchanged in the fading light of day. When they parted, Abigail felt as though something fundamental had shifted within her, a sense of belonging, of rightness, that she had never experienced before. "I love you," Yates said simply, the words falling into the quiet space between them like stones into still water, creating ripples that would extend far beyond this moment. "I didn't plan it, didn't expect it, but there it is. I love you." Tears of joy pricked at Abigail's eyes. "And I love you, Yates Keller, with all my heart." He kissed her again, more deeply this time, his arms tightening around her as if he never wanted to let go. Abigail melted into his embrace, feeling for the first time in her life that she had truly found her home. 2 months later, on a crisp autumn morning with leaves turning golden on the cottonwoods along the creek, Abigail Dawson became Abigail Keller in a simple ceremony at the ranch. Sheriff Davis, who had become a good friend to them both, performed the civil ceremony, while Dr. Harris gave the bride away. The Fletchers attended, as did most of the townsfolk from Agua Caliente and the neighboring ranchers with their families. For her part, Abigail hardly noticed the gathered crowd. Her attention was focused entirely on Yates as he stood tall and handsome beside her, his eyes never leaving her face as they spoke their vows. When he slipped the gold band onto her finger, his mother's ring, sent from his sister in Denver along with heartfelt congratulations, Abigail felt as though her heart might burst with happiness. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Sheriff Davis declared with a broad smile. "You may kiss your bride, Keller." Yates needed no encouragement. He drew Abigail into his arms and kissed her to the cheers and applause of their guests, sealing their union with a tenderness that brought tears to more than a few eyes in the audience. The celebration that followed was joyous and relaxed, with tables set up under the trees and Maria presiding over a feast that combined her Mexican specialties with traditional American fare. Music from a fiddle and guitar filled the air as the sun began its descent, and couples took to a makeshift dance floor laid out near the house. As twilight approached, Abigail found herself standing slightly apart from the festivities, watching as Yates conversed with some of the neighboring ranchers. He caught her eye across the gathering and excused himself, making his way to her side. "Happy, Mrs. Keller?" he asked, slipping an arm around her waist. "More than I ever thought possible," Abigail replied, leaning into his embrace. "I keep thinking about that terrible night, the night the Fletcher baby died. If someone had told me then that it would lead to this, to finding you and this life together, I would never have believed them." Yates pressed a kiss to her temple. "Life has a way of taking unexpected turns. Sometimes the darkest moments lead us to the brightest futures." "A very philosophical observation, Mr. Keller," Abigail teased gently. "I have my moments," he replied with a grin. "Speaking of moments, I have something for you." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small package wrapped in tissue paper. Curious, Abigail unwrapped it to find a delicate silver pendant in the shape of a key. "It's beautiful," she said, running her finger along its intricate design. "It's the key to our future," Yates explained, taking it from her hands to fasten it around her neck. "And to something else as well." He reached into his pocket again and produced a letter. "This came yesterday. I wanted to save it for today." Abigail unfolded the letter, recognizing the return address from Denver Yates's sister. As she read the contents, her eyes widened, and she looked up at her husband in disbelief. "James is coming to live with us? Your sister is sending him here." Yates nodded, his expression a mixture of joy and nervousness. "If that's all right with you. Hannah thinks it's time he knew his father properly, and with you here." He paused, searching her face. "I should have discussed it with you first, but I wanted it to be a surprise. If you'd rather wait." Abigail silenced him with a kiss, pouring all her love and acceptance into the gesture. "It's more than all right," she assured him when they parted. "It's perfect. When does he arrive?" "Next month," Yates replied, relief evident in his voice. "Hannah will bring him herself, stay for a visit, then return to Denver. We'll need to prepare a room for him," Abigail said, her mind already racing with plans, "and perhaps set up a small schoolroom in the house until we can arrange for proper schooling." Yates laughed, tightening his arms around her. "Already thinking like a mother." The word sent a thrill through Abigail. A mother not just to Yates's son, but perhaps someday to children of their own. The thought no longer filled her with professional detachment or abstract speculation, but with warm anticipation. "Do you think he'll like me?" she asked, suddenly uncertain. "He'll love you," Yates assured her. "How could he not? You're kind, intelligent, brave, everything I could want in a stepmother for my son." As the stars began to appear in the deepening blue of the evening sky, Abigail looked out over the ranch that was now her home, at the people who had gathered to celebrate their union, and finally at the man who stood beside her, his love a steady presence she could depend on through whatever life might bring. From the depths of tragedy had come this unexpected joy, a second chance for her, for Yates, and for a young boy she had yet to meet but already held in her heart. The path forward might not always be smooth, but they would walk it together, and that made all the difference. 1 year later, Abigail stood on the porch of the ranch house, watching as Yates and 9-year-old James rode together across the pasture, father teaching son the basics of herding cattle. The boy sat tall in the saddle, his dark hair so like his father's ruffled by the breeze, his face alight with concentration and excitement. The past year had brought changes both expected and surprising. James's arrival had transformed their lives, bringing childish laughter and endless questions to the previously quiet household. After an initial period of shyness, he had warmed to Abigail quickly, especially once he discovered her extensive knowledge of local plants and animals, a subject that fascinated him endlessly. Her midwifery practice had evolved, focusing more on the ranching families in the surrounding areas and less on the town itself, though she still attended births in Agua Caliente when called upon. She had also begun training Martha Fletcher, who had shown unexpected aptitude and interest in the healing arts after Rebecca's near-death experience. The most significant change, however, was the one that now caused Abigail to rest a hand gently on her rounded belly, feeling the flutter of new life beneath her palm. 5 months along, she carried the child she and Yates had created together, a symbol of their love and their future. As she watched, Yates noticed her standing on the porch and raised his hand in greeting. He spoke to James, who immediately turned his pony toward the house, racing ahead of his father with childish exuberance. "Abigail, did you see?" James called as he drew near. "I turned that calf all by myself." "I saw," Abigail replied, smiling at his enthusiasm. "You're becoming quite the cattleman, just like your father." James beamed at the praise, sliding from his pony with the easy grace of a born horseman. Pa says I can help with the roundup next spring if I keep practicing. By then you'll have a little brother or sister to show off for? Abigail reminded him, ruffling his hair affectionately. James nodded, his expression turning serious as he regarded her swollen midsection. Pa says I'm to help look after the baby, since I'll be the big brother. And you'll be wonderful at it, Abigail assured him. Yates joined them, dismounting with the fluid ease of long practice. He handed the reins of both horses to James. Take them to the corral, son, and make sure they get a good rub-down. They've worked hard today. Yes, sir, James replied, leading the horses away with pride in his new responsibility. As soon as the boy was out of earshot, Yates turned to Abigail, concern evident in his eyes. You should be resting, he admonished gently, laying a hand over hers where it rested on her belly. I've been resting all morning, Abigail replied, leaning into his embrace. Besides, I'm a midwife, remember? I know what my body needs. And what does it need right now? Yates asked, pressing a kiss to her forehead. Abigail pretended to consider the question. I believe it needs my husband to stop worrying quite so much. Yates chuckled, the sound reverberating through his chest where her head rested. Not likely to happen, I'm afraid. Not with you and our child at stake. His protectiveness, while occasionally frustrating, was one of the many things Abigail loved about him. From that first day when he had stood between her and an angry mob, Yates Keller had proven himself a man who would defend those he loved with unwavering resolve. Any word from Dr. Harris? Yates asked, changing the subject as they moved to sit on the porch swing he had built last summer. He sent a message this morning, Abigail replied. Rebecca Fletcher is doing well, no complications this time. A healthy baby girl. Fletcher's wife had given birth the previous day, their first child since the tragedy that had briefly torn the town apart. Abigail had not attended the birth. Rebecca had specifically requested Dr. Harris, but she had sent along herbal remedies to ease the labor and strengthen the mother afterward. That's good news, Yates said, genuine pleasure in his voice. Fletcher must be over the moon. Martha said he cried when he held his daughter, Abigail confirmed. They're naming her Hope. The significance of the name wasn't lost on either of them. Hope for the future, for healing, for new beginnings. It seemed a fitting tribute to all that had transpired over the past 2 years. Speaking of names, Yates began, his hand gently caressing her belly. Have you given any more thought to what we might call our little one? They had discussed various possibilities, but hadn't settled on anything definitive for either a boy or a girl. Abigail had been waiting for inspiration to strike, for a name that felt right for this child who represented so much to them both. If it's a boy, I thought perhaps Samuel after your father, she suggested, watching his face for his reaction. Yates's eyes softened at the mention of his late father. Samuel Keller, he tested the name. It has a strong sound to it. And for a girl, Abigail hesitated, then offered the name that had been in her heart for some time. Marie after your first wife, if you think that would be appropriate. Surprise, then deep emotion crossed Yates's face. You would do that? Name our daughter after Marie. She was James's mother, Abigail said simply. She will always be a part of our family's story, and I think she would be pleased to know that her son has found happiness again, that her memory lives on in our home. Tears glistened in Yates's eyes as he drew her closer. Marie Abigail Keller, he suggested, his voice husky with emotion. So she carries both her mother's names. Now it was Abigail's turn to feel tears well up. The gesture touched her deeply, the acknowledgement that while she hadn't given birth to James, she was no less his mother in all the ways that truly mattered. It's perfect, she whispered, sealing the agreement with a kiss. As the afternoon sun bathed the ranch in golden light, Abigail Keller looked out at the life she and Yates had built together, the thriving ranch, the growing family, the deep bonds of love that had emerged from the ashes of tragedy. She thought of all the twists and turns that had led her to this moment, all the pain and fear that had ultimately guided her to unexpected joy. The angry mob that had once threatened her life had unwittingly led her to the man who would become the center of her world. The cowboy who had stood between her and their anger had become her protector, her partner, her love. And in the end, the midwife who had been blamed for a baby's death had found redemption not only in the eyes of the community, but in the creation of new life, both the child growing beneath her heart and the family they had forged together. As James came running back from the corral, eager to share some new discovery with his parents, Abigail felt the baby kick strongly beneath her hand. She smiled, knowing that whatever challenges the future might hold, they would face them together: Yates, James, herself, and the new life that would soon join their family. From the darkest moment of her life had come this brightness, this love, this home. And she wouldn't change a single step of the journey that had brought her here.